When Jessica Martinez first met her husband at summer camp in the hills of North Carolina back in 1998, she never imagined she'd one day be hyperventilating in a parking lot outside a strip mall, begging him not to divorce her. But that's exactly where life had taken this mother of three, and her story of going from victim to victor in her marriage is one that millions of American wives desperately need to hear. Jessica was 22 when she said "I do" to Michael Rodriguez in May 2000. Fresh out of her parents' house in Charlotte, she'd barely dated anyone else. The whirlwind romance felt like a fairy tale. They'd met working at the same Christian summer camp, started dating that January, and 10 months later, she was walking down the aisle in a white dress, ready to start their life together. Michael was everything she thought she wanted: kind, hardworking, and completely smitten with her. Those early years seemed perfect on paper. Michael went back to school while Jessica worked full-time at a local insurance office. They moved around a lot, always chasing better opportunities, always believing the next city would be where they'd finally settle down and build their dream life. They were young, in love, and convinced they could handle anything together. Then reality hit like a freight train. 3 years into marriage, Jessica got pregnant, fast, and then again, and again. By 2006, she had 3 children under the age of 4. Little Tommy had just turned 3 when baby Sophia was born, with Marcus somewhere in the middle. Michael was working 2 jobs to keep them afloat, and Jessica was drowning at home with 3 tiny humans who needed everything from her, all the time. That's when the controlling started, though Jessica would have called it being responsible back then. Someone had to keep track of the bills, right? Someone had to make sure they weren't spending money they didn't have. So she took over the finances completely, sitting at their kitchen table in their cramped apartment outside Raleigh, surrounded by bills and bank statements, her stress levels climbing higher every month. "Where's the next paycheck coming from?" became her constant refrain. She'd lie awake at night doing math in her head, calculating and recalculating whether they could afford groceries and daycare in the same week. The weight of it all sat on her chest like a boulder. Michael would come home exhausted from his construction job and his evening shift at the hardware store, only to find Jessica wound tight as a spring, ready to discuss their financial situation or criticize how he'd loaded the dishwasher wrong. Again. "You need to ask for a raise," she'd tell him over dinner, while simultaneously cutting up food for 3 toddlers and trying not to lose her mind. "Other guys your age are making way more." Michael would just nod and keep eating, but Jessica could see him shutting down. The more she pushed, the more he retreated. The more he retreated, the more she felt like she had to take control of everything. It was a vicious cycle that neither of them understood they were trapped in. By the time they moved back closer to Michael's family in 2010, Jessica had become the unofficial CEO of the Rodriguez household. She paid every bill, made every decision, planned every family outing, and micromanaged every aspect of their lives. Michael had a good job now. He'd become a partner in a small construction business with his brother-in-law, and Jessica finally got to be a stay-at-home mom like she'd always wanted. From the outside, they looked like they had it all figured out. Nice house, successful business, 3 healthy kids. Jessica's mom would call and gush about how proud she was of them. "You've really got your act together, Mija," she'd say, and Jessica would smile and agree, even though something felt fundamentally wrong. The truth was, they were like 2 people running a corporation together, not like husband and wife. They tag-teamed the kids' schedules, divided up household tasks, and discussed business matters over dinner. But when was the last time they'd actually talked about their dreams? When had they last laughed together about something silly? Jessica couldn't remember. Their conversations had become entirely functional. "Can you pick up Tommy from soccer? Did you pay the electric bill? The washing machine is making that noise again." They were efficient roommates raising children together, nothing more. Most nights, Jessica would collapse into bed exhausted, with Michael already asleep beside her or downstairs watching television. She'd stare at the ceiling, wondering when their marriage had become so empty. But there was always something that needed doing the next day. Some crisis to manage, some bill to pay, some child who needed attention. So she'd push the loneliness down and start planning tomorrow's to-do list. The Cold Wars started around this time too. Jessica would get frustrated when Michael wanted the kids to play baseball instead of the art classes she'd already researched and budgeted for. She was the one who had to drive them everywhere, after all. She was the one keeping track of everyone's schedules. Shouldn't she get the final say? When Michael would disagree, Jessica would give him the silent treatment. She'd sleep in the guest room, make meals for herself and the kids, but leave him to fend for himself, and generally make it clear that this was the consequence of not going along with her plans. Fine, he'd usually say after a day or two of this. Whatever you want. Jessica told herself she was winning these battles, but she was actually losing the war. Every time Michael gave in just to keep the peace, a little more of his spirit died. And every time she had to fight him to get her way, Jessica felt more alone and resentful. This wasn't the partnership she'd dreamed of as a young bride. The drinking started gradually. Just a glass of wine while cooking dinner to take the edge off. Then a glass with dinner. Then another while cleaning up. Michael was doing the same thing. A beer after work became 2, then 3. They weren't alcoholics by any stretch, but they were both self-medicating the stress and disconnection they felt. Jessica would find herself counting the hours until that first glass of wine. It was the only time she felt like she could breathe, like the weight of managing everything might lift for just a moment. But even that relief was temporary. The bills would still be there in the morning. The kids would still need lunch made and permission slips signed. Michael would still need to be managed and directed. Things came to a head one evening when Jessica exploded about Michael's suggestion that Marcus join the traveling baseball team. She'd already enrolled him in art camp for the summer, already paid the deposit, already arranged carpools with other parents. "You never think about the logistics," she screamed, gesturing wildly with a dish towel. "I'm the one who has to drive him to 3 different cities every weekend. I'm the one who has to pack all his gear and coordinate with other parents. You just get to show up and be the fun dad while I do all the actual work." Michael stood there taking it, like he always did, which made Jessica even angrier. Why wouldn't he fight back? Why wouldn't he defend himself? His passivity felt like another burden she had to carry. "Say something," she yelled. "Don't just stand there looking at me like I'm crazy." But Michael just shook his head and walked away, leaving Jessica alone in the kitchen, shaking with rage and feeling more isolated than ever. That night she slept in the guest room again, but this time it felt different. Final, somehow. They were still married, still living in the same house, still raising their children together. But Jessica knew something had broken between them that night, something that might not be fixable. She just didn't know what to do about it. The next morning, Michael made coffee for both of them like nothing had happened. He asked about her day, helped get the kids ready for school, kissed her goodbye before leaving for work. But Jessica could see the distance in his eyes. He was protecting himself from her now, and she couldn't blame him. What she didn't understand yet was that her need to control everything was actually creating the very problems she was trying to prevent. Every time she criticized Michael's parenting, she made him less likely to step up as a father. Every time she took over a task because he wasn't doing it right, she trained him to step back and let her handle it. Every time she made a unilateral decision about their family, she pushed him further away from feeling like an equal partner in their marriage. Jessica thought she was being responsible, practical, efficient. She thought she was holding their family together through sheer force of will. What she was actually doing was slowly suffocating the man she'd fallen in love with, turning him into a passive observer of his own life. The saddest part was that Michael had originally been attracted to Jessica's strength and competence. He'd loved how organized she was, how she could handle multiple tasks at once, how she seemed to have everything figured out. But somewhere along the way, those attractive qualities had morphed into something that felt more like control than partnership. And Jessica? She was exhausted from carrying the weight of everyone's happiness on her shoulders. She was resentful that Michael seemed content to let her handle everything. She was lonely in her own marriage, surrounded by people who needed her but feeling like no one really saw her. Neither of them understood that they were stuck in a pattern that was slowly killing their connection. Jessica's control was making Michael withdraw, and his withdrawal was making Jessica feel like she needed to control even more. Round and round they went, getting further apart with each revolution. By 2017, when they decided to leave the family construction business and start their own company, Jessica and Michael were like business partners who happened to share a bed. They could discuss profit margins and project timelines, but they couldn't remember the last time they'd talked about their hopes and dreams. They could coordinate their schedules and divide up responsibilities, but they couldn't find their way back to the couple who used to stay up all night talking about everything and nothing. Jessica had no idea that the worst was yet to come, or that losing everything she thought she wanted would be the key to finding everything she actually needed. The turning point came in 2017, when old friends reached out about a business opportunity. David and Sarah Chen had grown up with Michael in Raleigh, and they'd reconnected at a high school reunion the year before. David had started a successful real estate development company in Charlotte, and he thought Michael's construction expertise would be perfect for some upcoming projects. Jessica watched her husband light up in a way she hadn't seen in years. Suddenly, Michael was energized, passionate, full of ideas. He'd spend hours on the phone with David, planning strategies and discussing possibilities. For the first time in their marriage, Jessica saw Michael truly excited about work. "This could be it, Jess," he told her one evening, his eyes brighter than she'd seen them since their wedding day. "This could be our chance to really build something." Jessica should have been happy for him. Instead, she felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. New business ventures meant uncertainty, financial risk, time away from home. But she bit her tongue and nodded supportively, even as her mind raced through all the ways this could go wrong. The business trip started almost immediately. Michael would drive to Charlotte twice a week to meet with David and tour potential properties. Sometimes Sarah would join them, and Jessica found herself alone with the kids more often than she liked. The 3 children were teenagers now. Tommy was 15, Marcus 14, and Sophia 13, which meant they had their own complicated schedules to manage. "Where's Dad?" became a common question at the dinner table. "Business meeting," Jessica would answer, trying to keep the irritation out of her voice. She was happy Michael had found something he was passionate about. Really, she was. But why did his happiness have to come at the expense of her sanity? The worst part was how much energy Michael seemed to have for this new venture. He'd come home from Charlotte practically bouncing off the walls, talking nonstop about properties and deals and possibilities. Meanwhile, Jessica felt like she was drowning in the day-to-day reality of keeping their household running. "You're spending a lot of time with David," she mentioned one evening, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, well, we're building something here. It takes time." "What about Sarah? Is she there for all these meetings?" Michael looked up from his laptop. "Sometimes. Why?" Jessica shrugged. "Just wondering. Seems like you're all getting pretty close." Something flickered across Michael's face, but he just nodded and went back to his computer. Jessica felt that familiar chill of being shut out, but she told herself she was being paranoid. Michael would never. They'd been married 18 years. He wasn't that kind of man. Except that doubt, once planted, grew like a weed. Michael was traveling more frequently now, sometimes staying overnight in Charlotte. He'd stopped drinking entirely, which Jessica thought was great, but it also meant he had even more energy and focus for work. He was becoming the man she'd always wanted him to be, driven, ambitious, successful, but somehow it felt like he was becoming that man for everyone except her. At home, he was distracted, always checking his phone, always planning the next trip. The kids noticed too. Sophia complained that Dad never helped with her math homework anymore. Marcus grumbled that Dad had missed 3 of his basketball games in a row. "He's building our future," Jessica would tell them. But privately, she wondered if Michael was building a future that included them at all. The night everything fell apart started like any other. Michael was supposed to be home from Charlotte by 7, but 8 o'clock came and went with no word. Jessica fed the kids, helped with homework, and put Sophia to bed, all while checking her phone every few minutes. Finally, Around 9:30, she called Sarah. "Hey, is everything okay? Michael isn't home yet, and I was just wondering if you guys ran late or—" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, I thought he left hours ago. Maybe he stopped somewhere?" Jessica's blood went cold. "You guys weren't together today?" "Well, yes, but just for lunch. The meeting ended around 2. Lunch. Michael had told her he'd be in meetings all day." Jessica thanked Sarah and hung up, her hands shaking. When Michael finally walked through the door at 11:15, Jessica was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee and a heart full of dread. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. "Sorry, babe. Meeting ran late and then I grabbed dinner." He kissed her forehead, but it felt perfunctory. "Sarah said your meeting ended at 2. Michael froze. Jessica watched 20 years of marriage crumble in the space of that silence. "We need to talk," she whispered. They ended up in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch like strangers. Michael looked everywhere except at her face. "How long?" Jessica asked. "Jess." "How long, Michael?" "A few months." Jessica felt like she was falling through space. A few months. While she'd been home managing everything, worrying about their finances, taking care of their children, Michael had been. "What? Playing house with Sarah Chen?" "I want a divorce," Michael said suddenly, and Jessica's world exploded. "What?" The word came out as a whisper. "I can't do this anymore, Jess. I can't pretend we're happy when we're not. I can't pretend this marriage is working when it hasn't worked for years." Jessica stared at him. This man she'd loved since she was 22, this father of her children, this person she'd built her entire adult life around. "We have kids," she managed to say. "I know, and they deserve parents who don't hate each other." "I don't hate you. Don't you?" Michael finally looked at her, and Jessica saw 18 years of resentment in his eyes. "When's the last time you said something nice to me? When's the last time you didn't criticize something I did? When's the last time you acted like you actually wanted to be around me?" Jessica opened her mouth to argue, but no words came, because when she really thought about it, she couldn't remember. The next few hours were a blur of tears and accusations and desperate bargaining. Michael was calm, almost relieved, like he'd been planning this conversation for months. Jessica was hysterical, begging him not to throw away their family, promising she could change, that they could fix this. But Michael was done. He'd already talked to a lawyer. He'd already started looking for an apartment. He'd already, Jessica realized with growing horror, checked out of their marriage completely. The worst part came when they had to tell the kids. Tommy took it with the stoic acceptance of a teenager who'd probably seen this coming. Marcus got angry and slammed his bedroom door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. Sophia just cried, asking over and over why Daddy had to leave. Jessica felt like the worst mother in the world. She'd been so focused on controlling every detail of their lives that she'd missed the one thing that mattered most. Her marriage was dying right in front of her. Michael moved out 2 weeks later. The house felt enormous and empty without him, even though he'd barely been present when he lived there. Jessica threw herself into single motherhood with the same controlling intensity she'd brought to everything else, but now she was doing it alone. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, though that was crushing. The worst part was the growing realization that Michael was right. They hadn't been happy for years. They'd been going through the motions, checking boxes, managing logistics. But when had they last laughed together? When had they last stayed up talking? When had they last felt like they were on the same team? Jessica started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, who asked uncomfortable questions and made her examine her role in the marriage's breakdown. It wasn't pleasant work. Jessica had to confront the fact that she'd been treating Michael like an incompetent child rather than an equal partner. She had to acknowledge that her need to control everything had pushed him away. But understanding the problem and fixing it were two different things. Even in therapy, Jessica found herself wanting to argue with Dr. Williams' suggestions. When the therapist recommended she try expressing gratitude instead of criticism, Jessica's first thought was, but what if he doesn't deserve gratitude? 6 months of therapy and weekly phone calls and family dinners seemed to pay off, though. By Christmas 2018, Michael was talking about maybe moving back home. He missed the kids. He missed some things about their life together. The business with David had fallen apart after the affair came to light. Apparently, David hadn't been too happy about his business partner messing around with his wife, and Michael was working construction again, this time for someone else. "I think we can make this work," he told Jessica on New Year's Eve, and she felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in months. Michael moved back home in January 2019, and for a while things were wonderful. They were like newlyweds again, talking for hours, making plans for the future, actually enjoying each other's company. Jessica thought they'd learned their lesson. She thought the crisis had taught them both what really mattered. Then 2020 happened. The pandemic hit their family like it hit everyone else. Suddenly and without mercy. Michael's construction work dried up almost overnight. Jessica's part-time job at a local boutique disappeared when the store closed permanently. They were stuck in the house together with 3 teenagers who couldn't see their friends, couldn't play sports, couldn't do any of the things that kept them busy and happy. And slowly, inevitably, Jessica felt herself sliding back into old patterns. She took over the finances again because someone has to keep track of unemployment benefits. She started managing everyone's schedules because we need structure during this crazy time. She began criticizing Michael's job search techniques because you're not being aggressive enough. Other people are finding work. Michael tried to push back at first, but Jessica had logical-sounding reasons for everything. She wasn't being controlling, she was being practical. She wasn't being critical, she was being helpful. She wasn't taking over. She was stepping up when her family needed her. But Michael knew better. He could feel the walls closing in again, could feel Jessica's anxiety and need for control washing over him like a suffocating blanket. The man who'd started to bloom during their reconciliation began to wilt again. The Cold Wars came back. The silent treatments. The nights when Jessica would storm off to the guest room because Michael wouldn't agree to do things her way. All the progress they'd made seemed to evaporate like morning mist. By the time they got the opportunity to work at the summer camp where they'd met, now a year-round retreat center, Jessica thought it might save them. Going back to where it all started felt like a sign, a chance to remember who they'd been before life got so complicated. But instead of bringing them together, the camp job highlighted just how far apart they'd grown. Michael thrived in the outdoor, people-focused environment. Jessica struggled with the irregular schedule and lack of control over her daily routine. When Michael had to transfer to another location an hour away, leaving Jessica to handle things at the original site, she felt abandoned all over again. The final straw came during the Christmas holidays of 2023. Jessica had been trying so hard to make everything perfect, the right gifts, the right meals, the right family activities. But Michael seemed distant and distracted, like he was already planning his escape. They had massive fights about something completely trivial, whether to watch a movie or play board games with the kids. But it wasn't really about entertainment options. It was about control and respect, and the fact that Jessica felt like she was losing her mind, trying to hold everything together while Michael acted like none of it mattered. "I'm done," Jessica announced, throwing dish towels into the sink with unnecessary force. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be the only one who cares about this family." "What are you talking about?" Michael asked. "I care about our family." "Really? Because you act like you'd rather be anywhere else but here. You act like spending time with us is some kind of punishment." That's when Michael said the words that changed everything. "Maybe because being around you feels like punishment sometimes." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at her husband, this man she'd loved for over 2 decades, and realized he was completely serious. "Fine," she whispered. "If that's how you feel, maybe you should leave." She didn't mean it. She was calling his bluff, waiting for him to apologize and pull her into his arms and promise they'd figure it out together. Instead, Michael nodded. Maybe I should. 3 weeks later, he did exactly that. When Michael announced he was quitting his job at the camp and moving to Asheville in September 2024, Jessica felt like she was reliving her worst nightmare. But this time was different. This time, she knew she was losing him for good. I didn't ask you to come with me, he said when Jessica protested that she couldn't just abandon her position at the camp. The words hit her like a physical blow. You didn't ask me, she repeated slowly, letting the full meaning sink in. After 24 years of marriage, her husband was making a life-changing decision without even considering her. Michael packed his truck on a Tuesday morning while Jessica was at work. When she came home that evening, half their closet was empty, and there was a note on the kitchen counter with his new address and phone number. No explanation, no goodbye, just the basic information she'd need to contact him about logistics. Jessica stood in their bedroom, staring at the empty hangers, and felt something break inside her that was deeper than heartbreak. This was devastation. This was the complete collapse of everything she'd built her identity around. That night, she sat at her computer in a kind of trance, typing random phrases into Google. How to save marriage. Husband wants divorce. Marriage falling apart. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for, just desperate for someone, somewhere, to tell her how to fix the unfixable. That's when she found an article that changed everything. It was about women who had transformed their marriages by focusing on themselves instead of trying to change their husbands. The concept seemed revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. Jessica devoured everything she could find on the topic, reading late into the night while her teenagers slept. The more she read, the more she recognized herself in the stories of other women. The controlling behavior disguised as helpfulness. The resentment that came from doing everything. The loneliness that grew from pushing her husband away while simultaneously demanding his presence. For the first time, Jessica began to understand that she might have played a role in her marriage's destruction. The revelation was both liberating and horrifying. Liberating because it meant she had some power to change things. Horrifying because it meant she had to take responsibility for years of behavior that had slowly strangled the life out of her marriage. Jessica started with 2 simple changes. She stopped herself from saying the first thing that came to mind, and she began deliberately choosing activities that brought her joy. The first one was harder than it sounded. Jessica's automatic response to almost everything was to fix, manage, or control. When Marcus asked where his soccer cleats were, her instinct was to drop everything and help him find them while lecturing him about taking better care of his things. Instead, she forced herself to count to 5 and then said, "I'm not sure. Where did you last see them?" When Sophia complained that she was stressed about college applications, Jessica wanted to take over the entire process, research schools, and create detailed spreadsheets. Instead, she took a deep breath and asked, "What kind of help would you like from me?" The second change felt almost selfish at first. Jessica couldn't remember the last time she'd done something purely because it made her happy. She started small, taking actual lunch breaks instead of eating while working, listening to music she enjoyed instead of having the television on as background noise, going for walks because she wanted to move her body, rather than because she needed to burn calories. She bought yarn and taught herself to crochet while watching old movies. She started a sourdough starter and experimented with different bread recipes. She planted a small herb garden behind the camp's main building and found peace in the simple act of tending something that grew. Most importantly, she stopped waiting for her life to begin when Michael came home. The changes in Jessica were subtle at first, but they were real. She felt lighter somehow, less burdened by the weight of everyone else's happiness. When Tommy called to complain about his college roommate, she listened without immediately offering solutions. When her mother criticized her decision to let Michael leave, Jessica simply said, "I understand you're worried about me," and changed the subject. Michael noticed the changes during their brief text exchanges about practical matters. Where Jessica used to send long, emotional messages analyzing their relationship or demanding explanations for his behavior, She now kept things simple and neutral. "Kids want to know if you're coming for Tommy's graduation," became her standard approach instead of, "Your son is graduating, and if you miss it because you're being selfish, he'll never forgive you." Michael started calling instead of just texting back. The first real test came when Jessica had to have her gallbladder removed. The old Jessica would have managed every detail herself, researched the best surgeons, scheduled everything around everyone else's convenience, and probably felt resentful that she had to handle a medical crisis alone. Instead, she simply called Michael and said, "I'm having surgery next Tuesday. I wanted you to know in case something happens to me and the kids need you." "What kind of surgery?" Michael asked, and Jessica could hear genuine concern in his voice. "Gallbladder. It's routine, but still surgery." There was a pause. "Do you need me to take you?" Jessica's heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. "Only if you want to. Sophia can drive me if you're busy." "I'll be there," Michael said. The morning of surgery, Michael showed up at 6 a.m. with coffee and the kind of breakfast sandwich Jessica loved from a place near his new apartment. He drove her to the hospital, waited during the procedure, and took her home afterward. "I should probably head back to Asheville tonight," he said as Jessica settled on the couch with a heating pad and pain medication. The old Jessica would have guilted him into staying, would have made him feel terrible for leaving her alone while she was recovering. This Jessica just nodded. "Thank you for being here today," she said. "It meant a lot to me." Michael looked surprised by her calm acceptance. "You're sure you'll be okay?" "I'll be fine. The kids are here if I need anything." For the first time in 24 years of marriage, Jessica wasn't angry that Michael had to leave. She wasn't keeping score of how much he did or didn't do for her. She was simply grateful for what he had given her that day. That night, lying in bed with her incisions still tender, Jessica realized something profound had shifted. She felt peaceful in a way she couldn't remember ever feeling before. Not because her circumstances were perfect. Her husband still lived an hour and a half away and they were still technically separated. But because she wasn't fighting reality anymore. Michael started coming home most weekends after that. Not because Jessica asked him to, but because he wanted to. They'd work in the yard together, have family dinners, watch movies with the kids. It felt natural and easy in a way their marriage hadn't felt in years. The real turning point came on New Year's Eve. Jessica had planned a quiet evening alone. The kids were all out with friends, and she hadn't made any plans with Michael. She was actually looking forward to a night of solitude, something that would have terrified her even 6 months earlier. She ran a bath, lit candles, and settled in with a book she'd been wanting to read. Around 9 o'clock there was a knock at the door. Michael stood on the porch with takeout from their favorite sushi place and a bouquet of flowers. "I thought maybe we could spend my birthday together," he said. Michael's birthday was the 1st of January, something Jessica had been carefully not mentioning because she didn't want to pressure him. The old Jessica would have dropped everything, abandoned her bath, and focused entirely on making Michael's evening perfect. This Jessica smiled and said, "I'd love that. I'm just finishing my bath. Give me 15 minutes." "Take your time," Michael said. "I'm not going anywhere." Jessica returned to her bath, her heart full but her evening routine unchanged. When she emerged, Michael had set out the sushi and was reading a magazine in the living room, completely relaxed. They talked until well past midnight, sharing stories and dreams and hopes for the future. For the first time in years, Jessica felt like she was talking to her best friend instead of negotiating with an opponent. Michael slept in the guest room that night, but something fundamental had shifted between them. They both felt it. 3 weeks later, on a snowy Tuesday evening, Michael called Jessica with unexpected news. "I gave my notice today," he said. Jessica's stomach dropped. "Are you moving further away?" "No," Michael laughed. "I'm coming home, if you'll have me." The old Jessica would have screamed yes, and immediately started planning how to make the transition perfect. This Jessica took a breath and said, "I would love that very much." Michael moved back home on Valentine's Day 2025. showing up with flowers and dinner and a smile that reminded Jessica why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But the real magic wasn't in the grand romantic gesture. It was in the small daily moments that followed. Michael noticed that Jessica had planted herbs and asked about her gardening plans. Jessica thanked him for taking out the trash without being asked, genuinely grateful instead of resentful that she'd had to do it for months. When they disagreed about Sophia's curfew, instead of a cold war, they had a conversation. Jessica expressed what she wanted: Sophia home by 11 on weekends, and Michael shared his perspective that midnight was reasonable for a 17-year-old. They compromised on 11:30, without anyone having to sleep in the guest room. The most surprising change was in their finances. Jessica, who had controlled every penny for 2 decades, found herself completely overwhelmed by the stress of managing money alone during their separation. "I can't do this anymore," she told Michael one evening, gesturing at the pile of bills on the kitchen table. "It makes me crazy, and I hate it, and I'm terrible at it." Michael looked genuinely shocked. "You've always been good with money." "No," Jessica said. "I've always been controlling about money. There's a difference." So Michael took over the finances, and Jessica discovered the profound relief of not knowing exactly how much was in their checking account at any given moment. Instead of anxiety, she felt a deep sense of being cared for. When Michael suggested they buy a new couch to replace the one that had been sagging for years, Jessica's first instinct was to research brands and compare prices and create a budget spreadsheet. Instead, she just said, "That sounds great. Pick whatever you like." The couch Michael chose was perfect. And more importantly, Jessica got to enjoy the surprise of coming home to find it delivered and arranged exactly where it should be. 6 months after their reconciliation, Jessica and Michael were working in their yard on a Saturday morning when Jessica mentioned that she'd love to be able to see through the thick cluster of pine trees at the back of their property. "It would be nice to have a view of the meadow back there," she said casually, pulling weeds from around their mailbox. "Yeah, that would be pretty," Michael agreed. Jessica thought nothing more of it. She'd expressed a desire without any expectation that Michael would act on it. She was simply sharing a thought with her husband. The next day, while Jessica was running errands in town, Michael spent 8 hours cutting down trees, hauling branches, and clearing the entire area. When Jessica came home, she could see all the way through to the meadow, where deer were grazing in the late afternoon sun. "How did you?" she started to say, then stopped. "This is incredible. Thank you." Michael grinned, sweaty and covered in sawdust. "I figured we'd enjoy the view." That night, as they sat on their new couch looking out at their new view, Jessica realized she was living in a completely different marriage than the one she'd started with. Not because Michael had changed, though he had in response to her changes, but because she had learned to be a different kind of wife. She was no longer the woman who managed every detail of their lives. She was no longer the woman who criticized and controlled and kept score. She was no longer the woman who expected her husband to make her happy. Instead, she was a woman who took care of herself first, who trusted her husband to be competent, who expressed gratitude instead of complaints, and who had learned that the secret to a happy marriage wasn't getting everything she wanted, it was wanting what she already had. "You know what I realized today?" Jessica said, curled up against Michael's side. "What's that?" "Our marriage is sparkly now." Michael laughed. "Sparkly?" "Yeah, it's fun and light, and..." Jessica searched for the right words. "It feels magical in a really ordinary way." Michael pulled her closer. "I love sparkly," he said. And as Jessica looked out at their clear view of the meadow, where fireflies were beginning to blink in the gathering dusk, she realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not the perfect marriage she'd tried to control into existence, but the imperfect, beautiful, sparkly marriage that had been waiting for her to get out of its way.